I'm May, and I don't think I need to introduce myself after Shuping's introduction, but I'm a PhD candidate at Brandenburg University of Technology in Cottbus, Germany, and I'm in my final year of my PhD studies, so wish me luck. And I'm funded by the German Academic Exchange Services, specifically within their Global Centers initiative, where I'm a fellow at one of their climate global centers, specifically the one in the Middle East. And my research focuses on common pool resource management and institutional change, where I look into tribal communities in Jordan and how they manage their common pool resources. I am working on 3 case studies, and today I'll be presenting one of these case studies, which is the 3rd case study and the final case study I'm working on, which is being written now, where we'll be looking at what makes a community-based resource management system fail. We have a case study of the Bedouins communities in the northern Badia of Jordan, where we'll be conducting an institutional analysis in order to understand the dynamics of their common pool management system. Just a brief summary of the other case studies I worked on, which are actually in progress to be published, which I'm very excited for. The first case study that I worked on is the management of irrigation water in the Jordan Valley region. And the Jordan Valley is the primary agricultural hub in Jordan. And the second case study, which is similar to the case study I'm presenting now, but it's actually very different. It's also within the Bedouin communities in Jordan, but the southern Bedouin communities, not the northern communities. We're also looking into their common management of their pastoral lands and their common rangelands in the southern rangelands in Jordan. For the first case study, actually, for the 3 case studies I'm looking at, we have different approaches of management. For the first case study, we're looking at a co-management approach where the government and the farmers work together, and they have a successful establishment of water use associations since 2008 until today, which attributes for the dynamics between the community and the government, and how do they have the co-management approach. For the second case study, we actually have a case of a self-organized community, a community that is managing its own resources with little intervention from the government. They just do some supervision, that's it, where they employ their traditional and local knowledge in this management. And for both of these case studies and the 3rd case study I'll be presenting today, we have a focus on the historical context of these communities, because we're focusing on communities and specifically tribal communities where they shed a lot of importance on their heritage and their culture and their history. It did, in fact, and we would see now how it affected the existing management systems of their commons, and how it actually affects either the success or the failure. And as I said, we focus on the community-based management, and we do shed a light on the dynamic between the formal and the informal institutions within these communities and these management systems. So, okay, those terms we use a lot, but let me define them so we're on the same page. First of all, throughout this presentation and also my research, I define institutions as the laws, the rules, the norms, and the customs that guide human behavior and the interactions with the environment. They serve as the mediators between the individuals and these resources by shaping the incentives and the property rights. Informal institutions, we refer to the set of rules that are codified, the ones that we find on modern legal systems. Informal institutions, which I make a lot of focus on my studies because it's very prominent within tribal communities, and it's the set of conventions and the behavioral norms that guide individuals' actions or limit their pursuit towards their objectives. These are often unwritten rules. They are established and communicated through unofficial channels. And common pool resources, of course, are the shared resources such as rangelands, forests, irrigation systems, and so on. So I'm starting my presentation with the very base starting point of the debate on the management of the commons, which is Hardin's tragedy of the commons theory. And he states that freedom in commons brings ruin to all. And I keep going back to this because I have different types of management settings, and I keep testing, like, does this have a root in the communities I'm working with? And we'll be testing this more and more with this community where they do not really have freedom. So do they not have ruin? So let's see. So So the starting point of the whole dilemma of the commons is that the main theory of this is that common pool resources will be depleted if we do not have any formal governmental intervention, meaning that it is important and the crucial element for a successful management or a sustainable management of common pool resources. And also that the achieving mutual benefits and sustainable management of the resources through collective action is not possible. And this whole theory was based on cases of open access pastoral lands, which consists of two of the case studies I'm working on. That's why I keep going back to the origin of the studies. So as I'm looking at rangelands, let's talk more about this resource in specific. So rangelands are the most dominant land cover. They approximately cover half of Earth's surface, and they do provide valuable ecosystem services and do host and sustain the livelihoods of millions of people worldwide. However, rangelands, they remain to be marginalized ecologically, economically, politically, and they often foster communities that are marginalized, such as our case. And rangelands, or in general pastoral communities around the world, face similar challenges. So the challenges that face rangelands globally throughout the literature that I reviewed is climate change, which is not only affecting rangelands, it's affecting all the resources we're studying, and overgrazing and land use, which can actually be all attributed to the climate change. And globally, it has been approved that overgrazing is considered to be the main challenge for the rangelands or the pastoral lands. But research on this matter has shown that collaborative management approaches, such as the community-based resource management approach, can be effective and can have a transformative effect for degraded rangelands worldwide. However, the successful establishment of community-based resource management for these lands has proven to be very difficult, especially in pastoral lands. And actually, throughout the literature, community-based resource management does not have either a one definition or even a one guideline to actually tell what can cause the success or what can cause the failure of such system. And this is why we're doing this research in the institutional analysis way. And also the establishment of community-based resource management within pastoral communities or rangelands have had mixed success rates with no very clear guidelines on what caused the success or the failure. And as I said, we do not have one definition of community-based resource management, but the definition we will be following for our presentation and my research and the paper that I'm writing is that it's an institutional arrangement that entails a management approach of natural resources. This approach incorporates informal local institutions, customary practices, and local knowledge systems in the management and the regulation and the enforcement processes. So when we went into the field and we're trying to look into community-based management and conducting all the interviews and everything, we thought what is better to actually test a community-based resource management than having a case where we had a functioning community-based resource management that went through an institutional change and transition into a non-existence community-based management. The community I'll be presenting in a bit did have a functioning and a very prominent community-based management for the rangelands, but now it has failed or it's not existence. They do not participate as a community in the management or the decision-making regarding the management of their common rangelands. And this community is the Bedouin community in the northern parts of Jordan. We call it Badia. Badia is rangelands, and it's the place where Bedouins live, specifically in a place called Al-Mansoura, and those pictures are from there. So basically, we're trying to answer this question: what went wrong? What have gone wrong that made this community-based resource management transition from a functioning system to a non-existent community-based management? So our objectives for this study that is now being written, and I'm almost done with the analysis, is that we want to investigate the factors that led to this failure, to this non-existence of a community-based management. Therefore, we will be doing an institutional analysis and also an assessment of this case study that has gone through an institutional change. This institutional change shifted from having a community-based resource management setting of their communal pastoral lands to a non-existent or no involvement of the community in the management process. The focus of our case study is the Bedouin community, and the Bedouins are the Arabs, the nomads that inhabit Al-Badia, which are the rangelands of the Middle East and Northern Africa. They mostly speak Arabic and they're mostly Muslims. So a bit more on the case study. So this is the location. This is the very unique map of Jordan. And our case study is in the north. I don't think I can point. No, I can. Yeah, it's in the north. It's there near the Syrian borders. And most of the rangelands in this area, which is called Al-Mansura, most of it is within a reserve, and it's the oldest rangeland reserve in Jordan and one of the biggest rangeland reserves in the country. So, as I said, the history that comes with this community is very prominent. The Bedouins have a very, very hanging on to their culture, to their heritage. They're still a marginalized community that has been a very long way to integrate them into the modern legal system of Jordan as a country. And this goes back even to the World War I, when the borders of the Middle East formed. So historically, this community is very independent. And by independent, that they have managed their resources themselves, and they have their own rules, and they have their own customs regarding this. And it hasn't changed much since then. But also, like the dynamics of the region did have an effect on that. But however, till this day, they are characterized as an independent community, a community that have its own rules, and even they have their own courts. I'm a Jordanian. I do go to the civil court. For them, they have their own tribal court, and it's recognized by the government, and they're actually enforced and empowered by the government, as long as they do not do any problems. So, and livestock breeding is part of their culture, and it's an inherited heritage from their grandfathers. And saying this is important because for them, it's not just a way of income, although it is the main source of income in this area. But even if they're losing, giving up this profession is not on the list as, okay, this has changed, but you can still find people with governmental jobs, but they still have livestock at their farm. And on the history of this location we're studying is that there was a very key aspect that kept popping up in the interviews that they kept mentioning. They were very satisfied and with their involvement percentage in the management process up until there was a shift in the management. As I said, most of the land there, the rangelands there, is within a reserve. And this reserve is under the supervision of the government, the Ministry of Agriculture. But sometimes they hand it down to other entities to do some management or even projects. And there was a hand down from the Royal Botanic Garden to the Hashemite Fund that took over in 2023. And this transition in management from the Royal Botanic Garden to the Hashemite Fund for Developing Al-Badia was not successful because the Hashemite Fund did not had a clear plan to actually include the community in the management process as they did in the period of the Royal Botanic Garden. And therefore, in this period of transition, there was no support for the associations that they formed at the period of the Royal Botanic Garden project handover. They had local associations for livestock breeders. After that, they stopped having any support for that, so they stopped. And also, according to many of the farmers I interviewed, they felt that their sound is not delivered with the Hashemite Fund. And from there, they dissolved all their local associations when this transition in management happened. And also, I said about the local associations. So from the transition of the management, they dissolved all form of like nested enterprise and all the local associations and the collective management and the collective management action that they had, because they felt that they do not make a difference. Their voice is not being delivered, and they're not part of the decision-making process. And as I said, they're a community that is very independent, and having this does not serve the project. And this has resulted to many violations, and this has resulted to, for them, I can say, quote unquote, not respecting the rules because they were not part of it and they were not educated on the parts of the rules. The rules such as not permitting grazing at certain points, at certain periods, times of the year. It has a scientific back to that, but it was not communicated. There was no education to the community. They were like, you're just not permitted to go there. Why? No one knows. So they did not follow the rules, and a lot of violations happens. And actually, the project of the reserve at the period of the Hashemite fund management was not successful in the means of regenerating the rangelands there. And now I'm introducing the case study as parts of the IAD framework. One of the things that really affects the existing management system in this area is the urbanization. As I said, they are a Bedouin community, but it's very different from the south, because the south, if you look at the map of Jordan, the south is mainly desert, but the north is greener. And also, Bedouins in the north have more tendency towards being integrated into the community more of the south. The south is like, no, we're good. We don't need anything else. But in the north, they try to integrate themselves, and they do follow like the projects and the programs of being more integrated into the civil community of Jordan. Therefore, there is a huge burst of urbanization in the north. You can go there and you can find a lot of built houses, unlike when you go to the south or to the southern Badia in Jordan. You don't find a lot of built institutions there. But in the north, you can find a lot of built houses. You can also find tents. You can find tents next to a house, but they do build houses, and there is a tent next to it. And also the things that really influence the management setting there is the climate change, because it used to rain more, it used to be greener than that, and now it's not as it used to be. And also the conditional rangelands. This is a very important thing to say when you're talking in the context of Jordan and the Bedouin community, because conditions of rangelands, yes, climate change did affect it, but also a lot of dynamics and political events in the region did affect that. For example, when countries started being countries in the Middle East and drawing borders, the Bedouin community has a characteristic of being nomadic, meaning they just roam around looking for water and for forage. But after drawing the borders, it's like, okay, you're now within a country called Jordan. You're not allowed to go graze in Iraq, just like this. And this has added pressure on land use, meaning that the land does not have the tendency to regenerate itself as it used to be in the past. In the past, it's like they graze here, and when it's like doesn't give any more forage, they go to another place and then come back. But now it's like they're a bit more restricted into one geographical place, which affected the biophysical condition of the rangelands in the region in general. And the community attributes, they follow the Bedouin values and lifestyle, meaning that you go there and you will find them wearing the traditional dress of Bedouins. They do have a sheikh, which is the influential person of a tribe that has wisdom, that tells them what to do and what not to do. And they do depend on livestock breeding. However, this dynamic has changed a lot, and they're shifting away from being completely nomadic and shifting away from the Bedouin lifestyle, as I said. Especially in the north, they have this tendency more than the south. And the rules that are being used is that there are formal rules. You can find them in writing. You can't graze within these months. You can't enter the reserve at these times of the day, but actually what they follow is the unwritten rules and the unwritten norms and customs. Many of the interviewees even express that they do violations even by bribing the guards. They sometimes have guards, they bribe them, and they go into that. They do not have a sense of belonging to this project or even to the reserve, because they were excluded from the decision-making process. So, and for all of this, we're trying to fit it into a framework which we chose. The analytical framework is the IAD framework. And at the first glance, it's the 2005 IAD framework with all the classical attributes, but actually spending a lot of time with tribal communities in Jordan and aiming to do institutional analysis for the different management systems that we've been through, we thought that adding a historical context attribute would help in better represent these communities and the factors that affect the outcomes of a management system. Because, as I said, history really did have a noticeable effect on the biophysical condition. As I said, forming the borders of countries did have an effect on the biophysical conditions of the rangelands, and the history of the independence of these tribes, of the Bedouins, did have an effect on the community attributes. And that history, for example, one of the cases I presented in the June conference, the IASC conference, is that the historical context of Jordan introducing Bedouin sedimentation programs where they aim to settle down the Bedouins did have a change in the community attributes from being nomadic to even like not just semi-nomadic, even like settlers in one place. And the historical context did also affect the rules in use, because the history that changed all of these attributes does call for an adaptation for the rules. And the Bedouin community is known to being adaptable with different environments, with different rules, and with different dynamics. All of this did, in fact, affect all of the outcomes that we're looking at now of the failed community-based resource management. Not having into account all of these did affect the outcomes, or even taking it into account, like the first case study that I looked at, did has an effect on the outcomes and the evaluation. And also, as I said, you go there, you can tell that it's a failed community-based resource management. But we need to use scientific words here, and that's why we did an assessment for the setting, and we use the Ostrom's design principles. And those are the elements or the conditions that help to account for the effectiveness of the institutions in sustaining grazing rangelands and ensuring compliance with the established rules across generations of appropriators. This is the original definition from Ostrom, and it's used for grazing rangelands, and I kept it there because I'm using it in this context, but it's used for any common pool resource. And we used it to actually say, why is this setting considered to be a failed collective action management, or a failed community-based resource management. And those are the 8 design principle rules which we are using. Of course, we all know them: the clearly defined boundaries, the congruation between appropriations and provision for the rules and the local conditions, collective choice arrangement, the monitoring, the sanctions, the conflict resolution mechanism, the minimal recognition of right to organize, and the nested enterprise. But we went a step further because I have different case studies, and having a scoring system for all of this helped us in actually tracking where was the shortcoming in this setting, and what was mostly absent, and what it gives you a better look on the evaluation as an evaluation, not just to tell that it's failed or successful. So we used this scoring system from Gary et al. 2017, where they did give a score to each of the design principles. If it's absent, it's 0, and if it's present, it's 1, and there is a range of other frequencies. And then you add them up. The score tells you if it's a failed, fragile, weak, or successful. And this helps in addressing the generality of design principles. When I tell you according to design principles, it's successful, or maybe it helps in the future for policymakers to actually highlight what needs more work or what needs more attention. And the tools and methods that I used for this research is qualitative methods, where I conducted qualitative interviews. In this region, I conducted 35 interviews with farmers and municipality workers and stakeholders. The interviews were conducted in Arabic, and then we went through the process of translating. And I always need to highlight this. It's, yes, I am Jordanian and Arab, which gives you an advantage on that, but actually translating the local dialects into something institutional statementy is not as easy, and it's not as simple. And I did spend quite a lot of time on this matter. And then we went through the transcribing and then the qualitative coding, and we did thematic coding according and based on the IAD, on the adapted IAD framework we're working with. And this is the analysis where we pinpointed the main things. I won't go through all of it, but let's focus on these three things. Is that, like, summing the thing that I'm analyzing, is that the managing of their reserve pastoral lands in the northern Badi of Jordan within the Bedouin community, and that the efforts that are being done are mainly led by the government or the official channel, which is the Hashemite Fund, and there is an exclusion of the local community. The interactions that are being done is that there happened no education whatsoever for the local community on why they should comply for the rules. They do not know why should you not graze at this place for 3 months for regeneration. They do not know. And they're a very simple community. Most of them are not educated. So you need to tell them why you're doing such projects. And there is no space at the time of the Hashemite Fund for the local associations to form or even to empower the community management. And the government interaction with the local community is very limited. It's only limited for them to come to collect fodder because they have a discounted rate for fodder if you purchase it from the government. And that the main thing that happened is the outcomes is that they're shifting away from this lifestyle. It's becoming very expensive for them to maintain this lifestyle because they need to pursue fodder from the government, and they can't actually graze on open lands. The urbanization that happened really limited the open land that they can graze on, which previously they used to graze on the land that is now very full of buildings. And they do have a lot of violations for the reserve and even the rules that are set by the government because they did not have any sense of inclusion or any saying in the decision making. And they are now even skeptical of forming local associations, even if they have the space now, because they think, what's the use of it? They don't listen to us. And this all combined to be a greater problem of overgrazing. They do overgrazing. The land there does not regenerate. Although it is greener than the south, it has a deteriorated state more of the south because of the non-compliance of the community and the non-inclusion of the community, shedding light on how important this is. Even in a place that rains more, it is deteriorating at a faster rate. And now this is the evaluation that we did. It's still, I screenshotted from the Excel sheet I'm doing it on. It's still not finalized or written about, but as you can see, summing it up, and it's all based on the interviews and my observation as a researcher because I visited the place for many, many months. And the summation is 2, which results into a failed community-based resource management or collective management. Now, the conclusion so far is that the absence of a thorough social assessment of the community before implementing or changing policies have a huge effect on the outcomes or the success or the failure of a project. And the lack of education regarding the objectives and the purpose of the proposed project or policy have a great effect on the failure or the success or the outcomes of the project. And educating them in a manner or a language they understand as a community, meaning be as simple as you can for tribal communities. And those are the conclusions so far. It's being written now, so I might share it. I also will share the other papers when they're published. But thank you for your attention. This is my 3rd case study of my PhD. So please, if you have any questions,